I drive you guys crazy and get you out of your comfort zone for a second? I want to take a picture for my website. Can you, move in a little bit? I'm going to be up here. You just be behind me. All right? Just move in a little bit. Well, we're doing a selfie together. You're going to help me out a little bit. On the count of three, say Pasta Vazul. 1, 2, 3. Pasta Vazul. There you go. Excellent.
I just want you to think they think you said Pastor Vazul, just so you know.
Oh, Pasta Fazul, not Pastor Fazul. Pasta Vazul is macaroni and beans, if you don't know what it is. By the way, lady had a problem last time I did this seminar with me saying that she loved herself too much. I said, look, we all love ourselves too much. She said, I don't agree with that. I said, I'll give you proof that we all love ourselves too much. She said, what's the proof? I said, have you ever taken a group photo? She said, yes. I said, when you look at the group photo, who's the face you go looking for? She went, who do you look for first in the group photo? Me. Okay, and if you don't look right, do you make the whole photo be taken all over again? Yes. You love yourself a little too much. Jesus used you loving yourself as the golden standard for you loving your neighbor. You must love yourself. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Anyway, we talked a few minutes ago about the brain and the different areas of the brain that are involved in empathy. That God has hardwired empathy into our very existence, into our very core existence. He's hardwired cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and practical empathy. It's right there in your makeup. Now that's your makeup prior to being a Christian. How much more empathetic should we be with the Holy Spirit inside of us? The very makeup of God, amen? Someone asked the question, how do you know that these are the areas of the brain that are involved in empathy? And that's a very good question. I want to give you an answer for that. Behavioral scientists, what we do to study behavior from a biological perspective is we hook up people to what's known as a brain mapping. It's an fMRI on steroids. I mean, it's far more sophisticated than an fMRI. There are electrical, receptors that are basically put on your head, just kind of like an EKG or fMRI. Your brain is seen on a monitor. All the areas of your brain are actually right there on that monitor. It almost looks like a map. You can see the prefrontal cortex. You can see the amygdala. You can see the hippocampus. You can see all these various areas of the brain. And as the participants of whatever the study is do what they do, whether we're studying how your brain acts when you journal, how your brain responds when you yell, how your brain responds when you show compassion, those areas on that brain mapping in your brain light up. So that's how, through the study of behavioral science, we've been able to say this area of the brain is active during this type of empathy. It's through brain mappings. And we've got so many studies that have been done over the last few decades, really, in understanding the biology behind psychology, because so much of psychology does come down to biology, okay? So just wanted to answer that for any of you that were a little confused. I did have that one question. It was a good question. Let's talk about cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy. It's divided into two parts. Okay? If you have high cognitive empathy, it means you are a person who is very lucid. There's lucidity in thinking about what you think about and in thinking about what others think about. Now, that first part is crucial. Being self-aware. Being in tune with what you're thinking about, as well as thinking about what someone else is thinking about. In fact, I told you a part of the brain. There's a part of your brain that is active in that area to analyze your own thoughts. Let me give you this analogy. You ever been talking to somebody and they say to you, you're not getting the picture? You've heard that phrase, get the picture? Okay, I want you to think of cognitive empathy as taking a picture. Okay? You're taking a picture. You're getting a picture of how someone sees the world. But before you take the picture, you've got to clear the lens. Because you could have a really good picture, but if the lens is cloudy, if the lens you're looking through, the filter you're looking through is cloudy, then you're not going to get the picture. How many know what I'm talking about? Jesus said this basically. He said, remove the plank out of your eye. If you're going to deal with the speck in your brother's eye, which, by the way, is part of your responsibility, we never get to the second part of that passage. He says, remove the speck from your brother's eye. But before you can do that, take the plank out of your own eye. Clear the lens. Make sure it's not cloudy before you take the picture. So the first thing we've got to talk about is something called bias. Somebody say bias. If there's anything that clouds the lens, you and I have bias. We have preconceived notions that influence how we listen, that influence how we interpret, that influence how we relate to people. And if we're not aware of those biases, chances are you're not getting a good picture because the lens is cloudier than you even know. Does that make sense? I'm going to give you an example of this within academia. I did my PhD behavioral science, 123 credit hours, 4 years, just the coursework. Never mind the bachelor's, the master's, 12 years of full-time college. 4 years coursework. When I'm done, the final step is you have to do your own research. It's called a dissertation. You got to go out in the field, do your own research, come up with a research topic, have it approved by the IRB, which is an academic committee. One of the things you got to do in that dissertation to show that your research is valid is you have to have a whole section in the dissertation, about 20 pages. 20 pages out of the 150 pages, where you as the researcher take into account all of your biases based on your history, based on your narrative, based on who you are, so that you're aware of what could contaminate your findings. If you don't have any section in the dissertation that says, I'm aware of my biases, here's what they are, your research is considered intellectually illegitimate. Because all of us, whether we know it or not, are biased. How many can say, I have biases? Part of cognitive empathy, the first step, is we're going to look at some specific biases. And you're going to look at this list and you're going to say, oh boy, I got to work on that area. Because chances are one of these biases is affecting the communication between you and your husband. It's affecting the communication between you and the people at work. And the more aware of it you become, the more you can mitigate it. But you got to keep it on Front Street. If it's in the subconscious where you're not aware of it, it's probably calling the shots. You understand? It's probably calling the shots. It's probably taking control more than you even realize. But the more you become aware of it, the more you can see it, know it, and shelf it. And say, all right, I'm aware that that's here, but I'm not going to let that affect my judgment right now. So cognitive empathy, before I can even think about what you're thinking about, I got to first become aware of what I'm thinking about. Before I can understand where you're coming from, while I'm listening to you, I have to at least be in touch with my own biases because they may cloud the lens and I might not get the picture. Is this making sense? Is this clicking with people right now? Or let's go to the next slide. I want to talk to you about biases. I want you for a little while to think about what you're thinking about. To think about what you're thinking about when you have conversations with your spouse. To think about what you're thinking about when you have conversations with the person at work. To think about what you're thinking about when you have conversations with your boss. I want to introduce you to 6 very common, this is not an exhaustive list, there's probably about 40 biases out there, but this is probably the 6 most common. That you and I, if we're not careful, it will hinder cognitive empathy. I call it the hiccup model because biases are like hiccups. They're glitches, okay? They're glitches in the software. They cloud the lens. They keep you from getting the picture. The first bias I want to talk to you about in the hiccup acronym is a halo horn bias. If we can go to the next slide. It's kind of a two-sided coin, this bias. The halo effect is I have some positive impression about you. You make me laugh. You're funny. You're educated. You got a PhD. There's something about you I admire. Some trait that is commendable. And now because you have that commendable trait, I put a halo on your head. And now all of a sudden, everything you say, I hear it through the halo bias, and you can do no wrong in my eyes. How many put a halo on people's heads? We had a famous comedian back in the 1970s and 80s who got away with countless sexual violations, drugging women. But I won't even say his name, but you know his name. Putting drugs in their drinks and getting away with it for years because he was incredibly funny. It was very difficult for us to see this man as a sexual perpetrator because he was hysterical, he was warm, he was brilliant, he had the greatest TV show in the 1980s. I grew up watching the show. I felt like he was my father. In fact, the first news report in 2004 that he had this particular problem, I came to his defense. I remember saying, look, you got to give the man a fair trial. I still believe that. I still believe innocent till proven guilty. But there was a part of me that said, no way can a man who is this brilliant and this funny be this kind of person. Halo bias. I've had people that they know I'm a doctor. They hear me talk. They come to my seminars. I do seminars around the country. And then afterwards, no, I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor in a specific area, behavioral science. And they'll go, Dr. Mike, can I talk to you? I have a question about my arthritis. I said, ma'am, that's an MD. I'm a PhD. I said, let me break the difference down for you. MD, mucho dinero. PhD, pile high in debt. The difference. But it's a halo bias. I'm smart in one area, therefore I must be smart in every area. You know how many medical questions I asked this guy? This guy, your pastor, is a medical genius. Let me just tell you something. I pick his brain when I'm with him. I'm a doctor in a particular area. I'm not a doctor in every area. I know attorneys that tell me, look, I practice tax law. I get criminal law questions all the time. I got to tell people I'm not a criminal lawyer. I'm a tax lawyer. Because we are prone to the halo effect. We're prone to find some admirable trait. It's that idolatrous part of us that wants to make a God out of what's in front of us. We want a tangible God. We find some trait in someone, and all of a sudden, because Oprah is a wonderful talk show host, she'll probably make a fantastic president. I'm not anti-Oprah. That's not the point. Don't miss the point. Somebody say, don't miss the point. The point is, stop putting halos on people. I tell this to pastors that are counseling people. He's like, I had a pastor call me a few months ago. He said the elder walked in my office and he's struggling with porn. He says, this elder, I've been looking up to him my whole life. I said, look, right now he's not an elder in that office. Never mind everything you respect about him. Never mind 40 years of being under his teaching. I get it. He's a good man. I'm not saying take those things away from him. But what I am saying is he's a human. Don't put a halo on him. And we do this to people. We put a halo on them. And now all of a sudden, they can't do any wrong. And now you listen to them, you're in conversation. This may affect your work performance. Because now you think just because your boss is the boss, that whatever you think must be stupid. And whatever they say must be right. No, your boss might be wrong in a particular area. Don't go crazy with that. Don't put a horn on him, but he could be wrong. He could be wrong in some areas. Are you hearing me? The halo effect. The horn effect is the opposite. We figure out some weakness that someone has, some character flaw. And now all of a sudden, we filter everything they say and do through the character flaw. We put horns on them. Now all of a sudden, they're a devil. Now all of a sudden, because I found out he is an addict and he has a problem with addictions, now everything he says is a lie. Now, everything he says is incredible. Everything he says is not valid. It's not something I can bank on because of this one. Oh, we just have a tendency to find fault in people. And once we find that fault, they're dismissed in our mind as anything they say is invalid. That's the horn effect. Can anybody admit I've haloed and I've horned some people in my life? Just a news alert. We're all mixed bags. Oswald Chambers said, in every man there's a potential hero and there's a potential skunk. Every one of us. has the imago Dei, the image of God, and the imago Adam, the image of Adam. We're all mixed bags. There's a winner in you and there's a sinner in you. Every one of us is a mixed bag. We have sacred potential and we have sinful potential. Every one of us. So horn and halo, if I have high cognitive empathy, I'm listening to someone, I'm in dialogue, I'm in conversation, and I got to take into account for a minute. Hold on. As I'm listening to this person, am I too stuck on some trait about them, whether positive or negative, and that one trait, I'm filtering everything they say through that one trait, and it's stopping me from really hearing. I'm not getting the picture. The lens is cloudy. Any questions or thoughts about the halo horn bias? Okay, second bias. Implicit bias. H-I-C-C-U-P. Hiccup. Implicit bias. These are attitudes, they're usually rooted in a stereotype towards a particular group of people, whether it be gender group, race group, economic group, age group. These are all the isms: racism, ageism, sexism, classism. Some stereotype. I have an attitude, and I may say I'm not prejudiced, I may say I'm not racist, I may say I don't discriminate, but yet, coming from my upbringing, things I heard people say in my upbringing, anytime I am in conversation with this kind of person, there's an implicit bias. It takes some soul searching to see this. It took me a little while to figure this out, and I'm not saying this is right, so don't hate me for this. But I grew up hearing in an Italian home, don't trust the French. That's what I was told. The time I was a kid. The word mafia, this is historical fact, the acronym mafia, is morta alla Francia, Italia anella. Death to the French is Italy's cry. That's where the word mafia comes from. Because the Sicilians were under slave. It was a slave revolt, the mafia, in its origin. They were under the slaves, the empire of Napoleon. They revolted. They formed mafia, La Cosa Nostra, our thing. And there's a deep-rooted hatred in some Italian communities towards the French. So here I am, 44 years old, and I'll be honest with you, the minute I find out somebody's French, so a little something happens in me. Just a little something. I'm like, where's my wallet? No, I'm just kidding. I'm an educated man. I've done some soul searching. I mitigate that bias, but the implicit bias is there. Some of you have it towards gender. Women are crazy. That's an implicit bias. Oh, she's just being crazy. Oh, you know women, you know how they are. They're just emotional. Oh, really? Guys don't get emotional? Have you ever seen a guy play a video game and he loses and he throws the remote control up against the wall? Women are emotional? Right? But yet there's an implicit bias towards women. Well, the man was made first. The man is superior. The architect always starts out with the rough draft before he comes up with the masterpiece. I'm sorry, guys. And you know what? There's a great bias in our culture towards men. That we're just chauvinistic, that we don't listen, that we don't care, we have no feelings, that we're oppressive, that we don't have our own stories of being abused. Sometimes by women. There are just as many pharaohs as there are pharaohs. You remember last year's message. Implicit bias. Now how about age? I mean, just some, stereotype that older people are thick-headed. Or younger people are unteachable. Now I want to ask you, let's see how brave you are. Right now, if looking at yourself, looking at your narrative, thinking about your life, how you grew up, the things you were told, what implicit biases have you struggled with that could be keeping you sometimes from hearing really what people are saying? Maybe you haven't let it take full measure, but at least put it on Front Street. Is there anybody willing to put an implicit bias on Front Street right now in front of this congregation? Raise your hand if you are. Anybody? I want to hear one. I know it's going to take a little transparency. Yes.
To be transparent, like one thing that happened. Oh, sorry. One interaction that happened to me, and I kind of like caught onto it like mid-conversation was when I lived in Mozambique, I sort of had the mentality of this individual that I was speaking with. It was just two different class structures. So we were sitting outside, he brought out chairs, and we were eating dinner. And I made a comment about the chairs, and I said, a lot of materials that we get from Mozambique is made from China, and things tend to be cheaper. For me, I thought it like logically, and I said, but what I ended up doing is I didn't even realize it mid-sentence. I said, I'm potentially insulting him, saying you have cheap furniture. And mid through that, I was about to say, yeah, and look at these chairs that because I was kind of like comparing America with Mozambique. And mid-sentence, I had to stop myself and saying like, I cannot, I have to change my sentence structure. So in the middle of saying, I was like, okay, look how this chair is, and look at the quality. I kind of like position it in a way saying like all the materials that they use, but I don't know how I dressed it up, but it was one of those moments for me. I had to kind of like step out from my scope and realize this is the best potential furniture that he had to offer, and he was treating me to a dinner, to a nice dinner, and this is the best he could have. I had to step away from my mentality of my materialistic scope and lens from being an American.
Now, if you weren't aware of that, which commend you for that, tip my hat off for you, because we all have a bias. It's a matter of whether we're aware of it. How would that affect your relationship?
He would have looked at me as a snob.
He'd look at you as a snob.
Yeah.
How else has implicit bias, maybe you've become aware of it, affected how you hear people? Yes.
So, I'm not trying to offend anyone.
Sure.
But growing up in my household, being Puerto Rican was like the best thing. Like you were Puerto Rican because, compared to other Latin communities, because we get to just get on a plane, come here, we don't have paperwork or whatever. And my mom and my family, we would just think we were above other cultures. So my mom would always say, like South Americans, you don't trust them. And I used to look at her like, why? I said, cause they come to this country and nothing about like stealing. They were different. Like they would betray her. And my brother and I, we used to always wonder like, what did that mean? And then when all the chaos happened with the border stuff and things, that's when I had an aha moment like, wait, these people go through different things that we, just like you said, putting yourself in that shoes. But when I got older, when I was younger, you couldn't tell me nothing about being Puerto Rican. Like I'm proud 100%, like I'll rock my flag, whatever. But growing up, it was like, my family really looked to other cultures like, no, we're Puerto Ricans. We don't associate with Mexicans. We don't and that was something until I got older. Another example I have is with my daughter. I grew up in a single household. So my mom just had dinner, worked, whatever. I always made it my business to always read to her, do things with her. And one day she said, Mom, I just want to say thank you. And I said, why? She was like, because I thought all moms read stories to their kids and all moms hug like my friends don't get hugs. So to see that from her, like it was like two things, like in her little head brain, every mom hugs their kids. Every mom has dinner with their kids until she saw in high school, like, my friends don't get hugs. My friends don't. So we don't realize what we tell our kids until, like I said, she helped me realize, and I never saw it until I grew up, that my mom made me believe that Puerto Ricans were the best.
I get it. Jesus challenges the people of his day with their own implicit bias by telling a story called the Good Samaritan. Samaritans in that day and age were despised. The fact that he would tell a story and make the protagonist of the story, the hero of the story, a Samaritan, was a slap in the face in itself. Because it was like, Samaritan? The Good Samaritan? But he's poking at that implicit bias. You've got this view of people, this view that one is better than another. They're there. You may not be aware of it right now, but ask the Holy Spirit, say, Lord, search me for implicit bias. I got them from my upbringing. It may not be ethnicity, it may not be culture, it may be an age thing, it may be a gender thing. It could be a lot of different types of groups that you and I, if we're not careful, we can have stereotypes that can affect cognitive empathy, our ability to hear what they're saying. Let me tell you about this interesting experiment that that's what I do. I read studies all day. This is a behavioral scientist and do studies. And one of the particular studies that's really interesting is called Group Homogeny. Follow me on this. Researchers wanted to see what our perspective of outsiders is like versus insiders. So they recruited a bunch of participants, as they always do in every experiment, 2 different colleges. Group 1 came from, let's say, Yale. Group 2 came from, let's say, Harvard. Okay, 2 different colleges. They asked the participants to say what their favorite music genre was. Each music participant said what the genre of music that they like was. One says, let's say, country. The other one says rock and roll. They then asked the 2 participants to make a guess. Follow me, don't get distracted. They then asked the participants to make a guess, a prediction, on what the favorite music genre was of the college they belonged to, as well as the other college. When they made a prediction, listen to this, they made a prediction on the favorite music genre amongst the people of their college. They said, I can't really give you one genre. We like all kinds of genres. When they gave a prediction on what the other college liked, whatever the participants said of that college, if they said country, they said, well, they probably all like country there. Here's the implications. The implications are when we look at outsiders, we don't see them in their variances, in their differences, in their uniqueness. We don't see them in their particularities. We see them as all the same. Oh, it's just another liberal. Just another Trump supporter. Just another Puerto Rican. Just another Italian. Just another white person. We see others as homogenous, all the same. We see ourselves. I realize that there are different kinds of Puerto Ricans. There are Puerto Ricans that are from this part of Puerto Rico, and then there are those that believe in this. When we assess ourselves judiciously. When we assess outsiders judgmentally. Think about that. And how many times have you done that? Because you know why? It's the law of least effort. It's easier to size you up quick. I don't have to get to know you. I can decide right away whether or not I'm going to take a chance and get to know you. The law of least effort. It takes time to get to know people, to really hear what they're saying and where they're coming from. Am I helping anybody? Third bias. Confirmation bias. Oh my goodness. Technology is messing you up in this area, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute. I'm going to tell you why in a minute, why Google is messing you up in this area and feeding your confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is you interpret new evidence and you twist it, you manipulate it. You don't even realize you're doing it, but you go looking for what you already believe. And you go looking for everything you're hearing to support what you already believe. Okay? In Bible college, me and John Paul went to Bible college 20 years ago. If a woman was interested in a guy and she wanted to marry him, and that was her belief, they were going to get married, she would make every single sermon and every single sign she saw fit and confirm and substantiate the fact that they were supposed to get married. Right? Confirmation bias. You know why? Because you find what you look for. You find it. If you come to church tomorrow morning at Riverside and you determine to yourself, I'm going to find hypocrisy. I'm going to go looking for hypocrisy. I promise you're going to find hypocrisy. You will find it. Not because there's anything wrong with this church. It's just because you find what you go looking for. But if you say, I'm coming to look for God, you're going to find God. Because you find what you look for. Confirmation bias is you're really not hearing what the person's saying. You think you're hearing what they're saying, but if it's a friend, you're looking to confirm that they're really on your side, that they're not saying anything challenging to you, they're not disagreeing with you in any way. Everything they say, you're making it fit with what you already believe. And if they're a foe, then you're just confirming everything they say to you is ridiculous. You're confirming that they don't know what they're talking about. You're just continually reaffirming what you already know rather than learning something new. Confirmation bias. Our brains become like ear-tight suitcases where the zipper looks like it's going to bust off the suitcase, okay? Your wife is going to fit everything into that suitcase. My wife has a wardrobe like Diana Ross. She does 5 costume changes a day. I mean, we go on vacation. We're going for 3 days. She's got like an entourage with bags behind her, like we're coming to America. Like just like James Earl Jones walking through the airport with 6 suitcases behind him. What are you, one of the Supremes? I got a backpack. That's it. 3 items in it. I'm gonna make these 3 items work. But our minds become this airtight suitcase. You can't fit anything else in. We're so close-minded, and we're only looking for information to confirm what we already know, and it interrupts. It's a hiccup. It interrupts cognitive empathy. How does Google affect that? Your search engines, and Netflix did a wonderful documentary on this, your search engines are paying attention. They're paying attention to what you search for, what you like, what your preferences are. And now you say something like this. You say, I'm going to go do some research. I'm going to research the political candidates, and I'm going to get a really good, well-rounded perspective on the issues. I'm going to go to Google, and I'm going to do some research to see who I should vote for. I got news for you. Google is only pumping back to you what you already put in it. It's only giving back to you the articles, the viewpoints, the positions, the journals. It's only giving back to you what it has paid attention you've given it. It feeds your confirmation bias. Does it make sense? Next bias. Next C. Conformity bias. I know we all like to think we're independent. We form our own opinions. We're not influenced by anybody else. That is malarkey. It's bullcrap. We take our cues from other people. If everyone thinks I'm funny, then chances are you'll think I'm funny. If there are 5 people laughing in the room and there's only 6 and you're the 6th person, in a few minutes you'll be laughing too. Because we take our social cues from others. It's a conformity bias. It means we form our assessments by taking social cues from other people's assessments. By the way, this is really dangerous in church communities. This is why gossip is so detrimental. Because now I tell you my experience with someone. And if I'm not careful and you're not careful, my experience becomes your experience. And now you don't like that person. You don't even know that person, but you conformed your assessment of that person based on my experience. When I did pastoral counseling, I didn't want to hear from the leadership about this person I'm about to counsel. I want a fresh start. I don't want to walk in that office with all this information. I haven't even met them yet. And now I got this opinion formed. They haven't even got hello out of their mouth. And it's all based on other people's experiences. Do you want people talking to your ex about whether or not they should hire you? Everyone's ex is a narcissist, by the way. Don't you go on social media and see it? My narcissistic ex. Everybody's a narcissist we don't like. It's not that prevalent, narcissism. Believe me, it's not. But conformity bias, we form opinions and assessments of people based on what other people are thinking and feeling. Got to protect the ear gate, the eye gate, what we hear, what we see, because it affects us. Famous experiment that showed this was Ash's experiment back in 1951. If you can look at the board right here, he set the experiment up so that everyone was in on the joke except one person, okay? So he's got all these actors that are involved in the experiment. They're all actors, okay? And their job is to answer the question. This is a true experiment. It's been replicated many times, and the results are always the same. All these actors, okay, they have to make a judgment on which of these lines, A, B, or C, is the closest in length to that line. All the actors were told to give the wrong answer. They're all told to give the wrong answer. When the real participant finally has an opportunity to choose the answer he thinks is closest to that line, he ignores his own opinion, which is kind of obvious. The answer is C. He ignores C and says A to fit in with the rest of the group. Ash's famous experiment that we conform our assessments based on. And when they interviewed the participant afterwards and said, what were you thinking? Didn't you know they were wrong? He said, I started to second guess myself, and I started to think, if everybody in this room is saying that's the right answer, it must be the right answer. I can't be that smart. Creates self-doubt. My wife and I go to the movies, and this is a true story. We walk in the movie theater, and the whole kiosk concept in this particular town was brand new. We walk into the theater, and there's a long line waiting to buy tickets. It's like 50 people in line. They're all going to go buy tickets. And I go towards that line. My wife goes, let's go buy tickets at the kiosk. Nobody's over there. I said, that thing don't work. Why don't it work? They're all in line over there. Come on, go to the kiosk, buy a ticket. The whole line turns around. No, the whole line moves towards the kiosk. Conformity bias. Right now, how are your assessments of the person you're living with, the people you're working with, your boss, your pastor, people in the church? How are your opinions being forged, informed by other people's opinions? Who are you listening to? God figured that out with Adam and Eve. He figured out you didn't come out with this on your own. You did not put this together by yourself. You're conforming to someone. Who's been talking to you? Who said that to you? We were naked. We were afraid. We hid. Who said that to you? Where'd that come from? How many of your opinions are really your opinions, and how many of them is because you've been listening to someone? Conformity bias. Okay, next bias. By the way, what are these doing to the lens? We're clearing the lens, but they were previously clouding the lens. And it keeps us from what? Getting the picture. We got to get the picture. Aren't you tired of your spouse saying to you, you're not getting the picture? How many of you heard people say that to you? Next bias. Unilateral bias. Unilateral means one-sided. It means you hear one side of a story, and because that side of the story is so emotionally compelling, you buy into it quickly, and you forget that there are other perspectives, there are other people that are maybe not there in that conversation. You buy so much into one side of a story that now all of a sudden you make a war that's not your war, and you bought into a unilateral bias. I bring this scripture up, and I've had pastors say to me, I've never seen that in the Bible. I've never seen that. I can't believe you just brought that forth. Out of all my years of reading the Bible, I had a bishop tell me that last week. He said, I've never seen that verse, and I'm going to give it to you right now, where Jesus avoids this kind of bias. Stay with me. Luke chapter 12. Young man comes to Jesus, and he says to Jesus, he says, make my brother share our father's inheritance with me. Our dad died. He left an inheritance. My brother's greedy. He's taken all the money. Make him share it with me. He sees Jesus as a man of power. He sees Jesus as a man of authority. Jesus says back to him in Luke chapter 12, verse 14, he says, am I an arbitrator to judge between the two of you? What does he mean by that? In those days, an arbitrator was set up in the synagogue. They would hear two sides of a story, and they would make a decision based on hearing two sides. What Jesus is basically saying is, your brother's not here to talk for himself. You want me to make a decision about the inheritance money. You want me to make him share the money with you. All I'm hearing is your side. I'm not an arbitrator to hear both sides. This is not my business. Listen, if Jesus knows when to mind his business, what's your problem? The most discerning man in the world said, it's not my place. I don't know your brother's side of the story. Maybe you're a crackhead. Maybe he's not sharing the money with you because you're going to smoke the money away. There's another side to the story. Unilateral bias says, you hear a story? Come on, admit it. It's so compelling. You go, oh yeah, I can see how that happened. Oh yeah, all right, oh yeah. Oh, did you hear her side of the story? Did you hear his side of the story? I can't tell you as a pastor how many times I heard one side, and I'll be honest, I fell into a unilateral bias. I didn't show it. I was wise enough not to say it, but in my mind I thought, wow, this is how it went down. And then the second person shows up. Solomon says in Proverbs, the first side seems convincing until the second person shows up to cross-examine. The second person opens their mouth, and I'm like, whoa. This is like watching Making of a Murderer on Netflix. The end of every episode, I got a different opinion. He's guilty. No, he's innocent. No, he's guilty. No, he's innocent. He's guilty. I don't know. How many have done that? Unilateral bias. You hear it, it's emotionally compelling. It's the first person to speak. Now it's anchored in your mind as truth, and you can't see any further. Am I helping anybody? Here's what I'm saying. Am I saying don't empathize with someone sharing their side of the story? Do, but always keep in your mind, I wonder what the other perspective is. And maybe even challenge that person and say, if your mother was here right now, what do you think she would say about this? How do you think she sees this? Get the picture. Somebody say, get the picture. Get the picture. Yes. You can confuse it for loyalty. Excellent. Are you a loyal friend when you just buy into their side and co-sign their madness? Right? That's not loyalty. Next, last bias. Packaging bias. Judging the content of information based on how it is presented. The woman is hysterical, and because she's hysterical, she must not be telling the truth. The man is blasé, and because there's no emotion, he must be guilty. I mean, we've seen this with Amanda Knox, a woman that was accused of murder in Italy, and because she didn't have certain emotional responses, the public judged her as being guilty of murder because it wasn't presented a certain way. We think things have to be packaged a certain way, and the truth is we all express ourselves individually and uniquely. You got to be very careful when you judge the content based on the packaging. A packaging bias. Now, out of all the biases we just went over, the hiccup model, halo, horn, implicit, confirmation bias, conformity bias, unilateral bias, packaging bias, which bias would you say looking at your modus operandi, your own life, which have you been most guilty of? How has it clouded the picture? Somebody. All of them. Am I helping you here? Because you're going to tuck this in your pocket. You're going to keep this with you. You're going to become more self-aware. Because I got news for you. The key to intuition is introspection. The more I know me, the more I can know you. Because now when I get me out of the way, the plank is removed. Now I can see clearly what's going on in you. Who else? What bias out of the 5 biases or the 6 biases you'd say has been your biggest kryptonite, your biggest pitfall? Yes. Conformity bias. Makes you self-doubtful, doesn't it? Start to question, do I really know what I'm talking about? Someone else. That's true. It's a big one. Yeah, absolutely. They do overlap. You'll often find 2 or 3 at once in operation. Somebody else, bias. It's effect. I want you to think about your immediate relationships. I want you to think about the people that are around you right now. How have these biases affected your immediate relationships? What's the biggest one for you? Yes. Yep. You believe the best. Everyone's pure? Yeah, that's funny. Yes. Now she went from halo to horn. Yes. Yes. She brought up a very good observation, by the way. Usually if you halo, it's not far off that you're going to horn. Because as you're haloing, you're building your expectation of that person, and their margin of error is getting thinner and thinner. So now once they make a mistake, the letdown is that much greater because listen, here it is right here. Friday or Wednesday, crown him. Friday, crucify him. The same people. Halo, horn. Crown him. He's the greatest thing since God himself. Crown him. Crucify him. Same people. And you'll notice that in your interpersonal relationships. You'll see that people will one day, you're a hero. And then it's like, whoa, how do we go from hero to zero that quick? Because as you were building me up in your mind, my margin of error got thinner and thinner. Now the slightest mistake. Listen, the responsible kids in a home always have it the hardest. Not the kid that's the prodigal, the rascal, because there's no expectations on him. He graduates Teen Challenge, and mom and dad treats it like a Harvard graduation. The kid that did everything he's supposed to do, the one who's been doing everything since day one, taking care of mom and dad, he makes one mistake, forget it. How many know this is true? Don't get me started on family dynamics. I could do a whole seminar on that. All right, we're going to switch gears for 1 minute. I need 10 minutes of your time, 10 minutes more of your time, then we're going to break for lunch. Now we're done clearing the lens. Okay, now we're done being self-aware, thinking about what we think about. Now we got to take the picture. We got to listen. We have to learn to listen. I want you to go to the next slide. This is now thinking about what other people think about. Hearing what's being said. Getting the picture. Listening skills right now in our society are so low. 2,000 years ago, people sat still for 5 hours in an amphitheater and watched a play without any commercials. Our brains, our attention spans have shrunk. The norepinephrine, which is the neurotransmitter responsible for concentration, is at an all-time low in our brain. All right? We're going to practice right now good listening. Thinking about what others are thinking about. Let me go to the next slide. We're going to use the word precise. The E is missing at the end. Because listening is a precise science. It's a precision. Okay? It's a surgical cut. It's not a chainsaw. It's a very nuanced sport, listening. It's paying attention to the subtleties, the details, what's said and what's not being said, the implications and the things that are loud and clear. Listening. P, pay attention. Now, let me say this to you about pay attention. You think pay attention is because you're going to figure out what the person is saying. Hear this. You think paying attention, when I really pay attention, it's all about me figuring out what they say. And that's part of it. But do you know the more attentive you are? Studies have proven this. The more attentive you are, not only do you figure out what the person is saying, but you fish out what the person is saying, because people reveal more to attentive people. Did you catch that? The more attentive you are to someone, the more information you'll get. Some of us parents are wondering why our kids don't talk to us. If we do have a conversation, it's shallow. They're not really getting to the bottom of what's going on. I really like to know what my wife is thinking, what my husband is thinking. People give more. They reveal more to attentive people. Paying attention doesn't just help you figure it out. It helps you fish it out. You're able to draw more out of somebody. This whole idea that you can multitask, I'm telling you right now, it is hurting relationships. Attentiveness, I'm big on it. I'm big on it in my classrooms with the kids. It's like attentive. I want you to get this. Now, I know ADD. I understand it. I have ADD. I've been at war with it my whole life. I have the attention span of a mosquito at a barbecue, okay? It's like bzzz, bzzz, beans, bzzz, okay? The fan's going. Studies have shown, I'm gonna give you a little trick. Studies have shown that fidgetiness, find something to fidget with. Not distract people. Sometimes I keep a paperclip in my pocket. Fidgeting releases the neurotransmitter norepinephrine. The neurotransmitter norepinephrine is the very neurotransmitter that causes you to focus. We know through brain mappings that by fidgeting, it releases that neurotransmitter. Learn to fidget. Not fidget, distract people, but just find something to fidget with, because it's going to actually help you lock your focus on what that person is saying. Pay attention. Somebody say pay attention. Second thing, relax. Your posture, how relaxed you are, where you're sitting when you talk to someone, versus in the hallway, on the go, quick, fast. that posture, that relaxation is going to enable. Here's what happens. When you're relaxing, your fight, flight, freeze, fawn, survival instincts, the amygdala shuts off. You know what that means? Now you're listening not so defensively, but you're listening receptively. Okay? If you're not relaxed, guess what's happening? The four survival instincts, you're ready to fight. Now all of a sudden conversations become contentions. This didn't have to be so argumentative. This could have been a lot more productive if I had relaxed, because when I relax, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn instincts are off. I don't want to have a conversation with you and it become an argument. I want to have a conversation with you and we get something done. We accomplish. We make some headway. We find out what it is that's in between us and we remove the petitions. Starts out we're relaxing. Because if I'm relaxed, you're relaxed, now we're not at war. This is not a battlefield, not a war zone. This is a meeting of the minds. Anybody learning anything there? 3, envision. When people are talking, what they're saying, they're telling a story. In your mind, envision the people that they're referring to. It's going to activate empathy. You're going to be able to see the world as they see it. Think about, in visual terms, what's being said. Now, number 4 and 5 are 2 kinds of questions you should ask in any dialogue. If you're a good listener, you're a good question asker. You should ask clarifying questions and you should ask inquisitive questions or inquiring questions. Clarifying questions is, look, I got to clarify. I think you just said this, John Paul. Is that what you meant? No, Mike, that is not what I meant. What are you, nuts? You got to have the guts to clarify. Because you know why? Here's where it gets real spiritual. Somebody says it's going to get spooky right now. It's going to get real spooky right now. One of the names for the devil is the prince of the ear, the airwaves. That means that there's an instigator between you and your spouse. He lives in the airwaves, and everything you say, he corrupts the airwaves. So by the time it leaves your mouth and they hear it, what they're hearing you say and what you meant are not the same thing. Because there's a prince of the air. He wants to instigate feuds. He's a troublemaker. In Italian, we say ficanage. He's somebody that just can't mind his business. He's meddlesome. He wants to create feuds. He wants divisions between you and the people you love. And he is the prince of the air, and you and I got to clear the air. We clear the air with clarifying questions. I have a conversation with somebody. It's like every minute I'm saying, wait, hold on. Did you just say this? I want to make sure we're on the same page. And if you get it wrong, so what? At least you clarified. Clarify. Ask clarifying questions. And then ask inquiring questions. How'd that make you feel? Tell me more about that. Why do you think you did that? Probe. Inquire. People love talking to someone that they know cares about what they feel and helps them understand and discover themselves. Inquire. We getting the picture? S, here's a big one. Suspend judgment. There are 2 kinds of listeners in here. Pay attention. 2 kinds of listeners. There are people that listen like a goalie in a soccer game. And then there are people that listen like a catcher in a baseball game. Okay? The goal is to be the catcher, not the goalie. A goalie, when you kick the ball to the goalie, what does he do? He blocks it. That's how some people listen. They just defend. They ain't even listening to you. They're just defending their position. Everything you say, they don't catch anything you say. They just defend it. Goalie in a soccer game. The catcher in the baseball game, are you catching my point? He listens not defensively. He listens receptively. He catches the point. He catches it. How do we do that? We got to suspend judgment. Got to open up the mind and say, all right, I want to catch what you're saying right now. I don't want to block it. I want to catch it. I don't want to be a goalie. I want to be a catcher. I'm going to suspend judgment. I have an opinion about you. I came to this with all sorts of conclusions about where you're coming from, who you are. I've fallen into halo biases and horn biases and conformity biases and confirmation biases. I've come so defensively, but I'm going to drop my defenses for a minute, suspend all judgment, hit the reset button, let you start fresh, and hear what you're saying. Suspend judgment. Lastly, here's key. Guys, in every dialogue, the ending of that dialogue is what's most crucial. I tell pastors when they're counseling, I say, listen, in your pastoral counseling, how you end that appointment is most crucial. Because by and large, we all have abandonment issues. That's why Jesus says, never will I leave you or forsake you. Our greatest fear is to be forsaken. We've all been forsaken at some point. And if the ending of a conversation isn't handled tactfully, people feel like you blew them off. I've been in conversations with people for 2 hours. I gave them 2 hours of my time. 2 hours. And because I ended it in a hurry, all they remember is the last minute. And they walked away saying, he was quick with me. No, I wasn't. But because there's an abandonment issue that we all have, this feeling of feeling forgotten, forsaken, left out, kicked to the curb, not paid attention to, that rush at the end taps into that. And now I just feel like you blew me off. So how we end it, here's how I like to end conversations. I like to say to people, all right, look, I don't want to rush you. I say, we've been spending some time together. I usually give a recap of what was just said, so they leave the conversation feeling heard. I give a recap. All right, last 10 minutes, this is what we went over. I give a recap. And then I say, look, we're going to meet again. Let's, maybe what's your schedule look like next week? I'm not leaving you. End tactfully. Because oftentimes the way we end it, even if we spent 2 hours giving our undivided attention to our son, our daughter, someone at work, someone at church, how we end it, if we don't end it tactfully, people will feel abandoned and they will feel blown off. That's cognitive empathy in a nutshell. Before we get dismissed for lunch, we just cleared the lens. Hopefully we're taking good pictures. Is there any questions, any feedback? Yes.
As you were speaking the entire time, I just kept thinking about marriage. And it's funny because me and my husband have gone through many, many things, and next year will be 10 years. So I kept thinking one of the main things that we always had an issue with was we couldn't talk. We developed a habit of texting each other. And we live in the same house. We sleep together. We have kids together.
Been there.
But we didn't pay attention. We didn't know how to listen. We were so quick to answer. We had a defense. We didn't relax. We didn't clarify. We didn't inquire, et cetera, et cetera. And over the last year or two, we've taken the time to actually sit down and do table talk.
Wow.
And just have conversations. And they've become so intimate that it's sexy.
It's sexy. You hear that, guys? Wow. It's sexy. You got sexy all of a sudden. You turned to George Clooney just by listening.
You want to have a conversation. Most people think intimacy is only sex, it's in the bedroom, but we've grown to love each other so much more because I'm paying attention. And I'm a very long talker. I can talk for days. And most people who know me know that.
Yes.
So, Pastor, don't look at me like that.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to rename the seminar. I'm going to call it How to Be Sexy. So the next church, we're going to call it How to Be Sexy. Excellent point. Here's what, I'm going to sum up what she just said. And this is true for every one of us, because we're self-centered creatures. Because we're self-centered, listening is not instinctual, it's intentional. Instinctual is you in love with you. Intentional is, I got to make an effort at this. I've got to make an effort. I've got to take what I learn and go put it to practice. All right, guys, be dismissed, go to lunch, we'll come back, and we'll talk about emotional and practical empathy.
Just amazing. Amazing. So it's time for lunch. There's just few instructions on how we're going to do this. So we have sandwiches for everyone. There's potato and macaroni salad, and also